have been talked about, they've been given. Jesus did these things and many others so that we may believe that Jesus is the way, that Jesus is the means of eternal life. And so these miracles that John describes as signs, there's 7 of them. We looked at the first one a couple of weeks ago where Jesus was in Cana and he turned the water into wine at that wedding feast, and then he began a little bit of a journey. He journeyed to Capernaum, then to Jerusalem, tossed some money changers out of the temple. He talked to Nicodemus about being born again. Then he traveled northward, stopping at the well in Samaria, and talked to the woman about living water there, that Samaritan woman, before he made his way back up into Galilee. Last week, we found him back in Cana performing the second sign where there was an official for Capernaum who traveled up to Cana begging Jesus to come back and to heal his son. And Jesus spoke healing 19 miles away into this child's life, and he was made well. Well, today we come to the third sign, and the third sign takes place back in Jerusalem. Jesus is traveling around quite a bit, and we'll see, transitioning from chapter 4 to chapter 5, there in verse 1, after this there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem to celebrate it. So Jesus is heading back to Jerusalem for a feast. We don't know which one. The Bible doesn't dictate which feast. There are a number of feasts that the Israelites would celebrate, the Jewish people would celebrate. They had several throughout the year, but apparently which one this is, it really doesn't matter to the story. And it's while Jesus is in Jerusalem that he's walking around and he passes by what is known as the Pool of Bethesda. You read about it there in verse 2. Look at it again. He says, "Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic, it's called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades, and in these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed." What you're seeing here is Jesus is stumbling upon a legendary site. It's a place that's become quite known, quite popular in Jesus' day. People believed that the Pool of Bethesda had some kind of miraculous powers associated with it. Now, have you ever been to a magical place before? I'm not talking about where Mickey and Minnie live. We're not talking about the Magic Kingdom, okay? If you've ever been to one of these places that people believe has something unusual, something miraculous attached to it. There are a number around the world that people claim to have some special power as opposed to other places. I remember traveling around Poland. I didn't get to actually go to see this, but in Poland, one of the most famous tourist sites is a place to go see what is known as the Black Madonna. And the image of this picture of Mary, the mother of Jesus, can be found throughout Poland. And the story behind this, and people believe that there's this place, this photo or this painting is powerful, it has the power to heal, the power to perform miracles. And it's associated to a historic event that dated back to the 1400s, where Hussite invaders came into this church house, to this monastery, and one of the robbers took a sword when the painting of this Black Madonna fell to the ground, pierced it a couple of times, and before he was able to pierce it another time, the legend says that the painting started to bleed, and it scared the Hussite invaders so much that they rushed out in fear. And that's the legend of something that has happened there. I don't know what happened there. I seriously doubt that the thing started to bleed. But a legend built up around this. And to this day, people will stream to Poland and will go to the site of the Black Madonna to gaze upon it. Many of them coming with burdens, physical issues, praying as they are in the presence of this photo, this painting, that healing would come miraculously. And that's really what's going on back in the scriptures at the Pool of Bethesda. The legend was that occasionally an angel would disturb the water, and if you believe that this happened, when this angel disturbed the water, you would have to be the very first person into the water. If you had some kind of ailment, some kind of infirmity, if you were the first person into the water after the angel stirred the water, then you would be healed. Lots of people believe this. It became legendary very quickly. In fact, you may have noticed, if you were following along in the English Standard Version that I was reading from, that there was a verse that was missing. Did you notice that? It goes from verse 3 to verse 5, and there's a reason why it does not appear in the ESV, which was a modern translation. But if you're in the reading from, say, the King James Version, here's what you missed. Verse 4 reads like this in the King James. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. Now the reason why this verse does not appear in the English Standard Version, the ESV version, is that that verse is actually not in the oldest Greek manuscripts that we have from this passage of Scripture. And so the decision was made to not include it. But it really speaks to the fact that there was a legend that was floating around, and people wanted to believe it, that there was an angel that came along and stirred it up. That's how it appeared in the King James. Here's what likely happened in starting the legend. The pool was fed by an underground subterranean spring, and occasionally, periodically, the spring itself would send a ripple up through the water. And it's highly likely that someone was near the water when that happened one time, somebody with a disease. They slipped into the water and claimed that as a result of that they were healed from whatever affliction that was upon them. Concluding that he had been healed, he goes out and starts talking about it. Before you know it, it is passed from person to person. The news begins to spread, and suddenly a legend is born. And other people who have been sick and afflicted and diseased or had some kind of injury wanted the same kind of healing, and so they began to gather by the pool over time. Now I want you to imagine this pitiful scene unfolding. Hundreds and hundreds of people are laying under 5 covered colonnades. And the Bible describes it as a multitude. And to get the healing, you're going to have to be ready. You're waiting. You're desperate for healing, but you got to wait when that water begins to stir. Everybody's starting to fight and to struggle over one another, trying to climb into the water. Again, according to the legend, the first one in is the only person who is going to be healed, and so it is on you. The angel does its work, but you got to do your work in order to experience the healing. John describes this pitiful scene there in verse 3 again. He says, in these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. It's not just a few people. Multitude. Hundreds of people are here. Sick people. We can well imagine that because they're there waiting, they're probably brought by every single day. Some may even live there, waiting for the moment for the water to be stirred. You can well imagine with the heat of the Middle East that a stench is rising. They're not able to care for themselves. They can't wash themselves. And you see these dirty, filthy, hopeless people all gathered together, sick people, hundreds of them. And Jesus comes and begins to survey the scene. We're told about the blind. Some were born blind, congenital blindness, but probably some became blind after that. You have the lame. These are people that are crippled. They're unable to walk. Closely related to that are the paralyzed, people who have limbs that have begun to wither away. The blind certainly couldn't find the pool to be close enough, but they don't know when the water is stirring. The lame and the paralyzed, they would have trouble getting to the pool, even if they could see. Their only hope was that there were others that are in worse shape than themselves, and that they could beat out the other people to get to the water. I mean, this whole scene is just a desperate, pitiful, sad scene. John is speaking about them when he talks about them being blind and lame and paralyzed. He's talking about their physical deformities or disabilities. But I think it really reminds us, it ought to remind us, that this is a physical representation of what all of humanity is like spiritually. Our problems go far beyond the physical realm and go into the spiritual realm. And without Jesus, without salvation, without the grace of the Lord, without the work of the cross being applied to us, we are spiritually blind, we are spiritually lame, we are spiritually paralyzed. We're unable to help ourselves. Paul would make this statement in Romans chapter 5, verse 6. For while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. We're weak. It means we're feeble. We're unable to help ourselves. He's speaking about not the physical, but the spiritual. So this whole scene that we see described back in John chapter 5 really represents all of us. It's a sad, sad scene, except for one thing. Jesus is there. Jesus walks in, begins to survey the scene, and begins to lay eyes on one person after one person after the next, and finally lays eyes on the worst of them all. And can I just pause here for just a second and say something that sort of troubled me, or at least it used to trouble me? There are hundreds of people in need of healing. Jesus is going to walk in and he's going to single out just one of them to be healed. He has the power to heal everybody, right? He has the power to speak a word so that everybody receives healing. We're going to see him dealing with thousands of people next week who are hungry, and Jesus is going to perform a miracle and bless the entire crowd. But on this occasion, where there are hundreds of people in pitiful physical shape, Jesus is only going to heal one. I will always remember this the next time that somebody of the healing tribe, you know what I'm talking about, people that believe that if you have enough faith and that you can be healed physically. The kind of people where you go to some of these gatherings and you'll have a famous televangelist healing just about anybody that comes up on the platform. And I always think, man, if you have the power to heal, why are you gathering in this church house or under this tent? Why don't you walk yourself down to the hospital and start walking through the hallways and healing people, right? They never do that. And I'm going to tell you why. Because Jesus here, I believe, is demonstrating for us that the most important thing in life is not our physical well-being, it's our spiritual well-being. He is not coming to heal everybody so that they have a good life, a nice life here on this earth. No, his healing and the work that he's going to do in this one man's life is not about making people have a better life. It's about them coming to know that Jesus himself is God. So let's take a look at this one guy that Jesus healed. There in verse 5. It says, one man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. I want you to think about this.